I think that, first of all, we should be aware of what has happened over the last 3 years. The last time we met in this wonderful conference room, thanks to our friend Klaus, it was in 2020. And over the last 3 years, we have experienced the COVID, the lockdown, the recession in every developing or developed countries, the rise of inflation, and the war in Ukraine. And yet we are still here. We are back discussing over the future of the world and over the best solutions for the world. That's the first good news. The second good news is that Europe, over the last 3 years, has become a super political power, like China and like the United States. That's good news for all of us to have a continent like Europe being able to defend its values, to defend its interest. Putin thought we would be divided and we would be weak. We have been united and we have been strong, and we will remain united and we will remain strong vis-à-vis Putin and vis-à-vis the war in Ukraine. That's the very good news. Nevertheless, we should be aware that over the last 3 years, we have entered a new era of globalization. We have shifted from a market-driven globalization to a politically power-driven globalization. And we have to draw all the consequences of that. We have to avoid the worst-case scenario. No fragmentation, but more cooperation. No trade war, as Larry said, but just a fair competition. Competition is a good thing for all of us. No new war, but engagement of all countries, including China. China cannot be out. China must be in. And you know that this is the difference of view that we have between the US and Europe. We don't want to oppose China. We want to engage China, and we want China to obey by the same rules, to obey by the same rules on intellectual property, on the level playing field, on the access to market. This is our policy, and that's a good thing that we can have different views. As far as your question is concerned, Inflation Reduction Act, I think that we need to have a global approach. That's a good thing that the United States of President Biden have decided to invest in the green industry and have decided to accelerate the fight against climate change, and Europe must do the same thing. But if we want to compete, we need to have a very strong, effective, efficient, swift European industrial policy based on 3 key pillars. The first one is acceleration. Private companies, industrial companies cannot wait 2 or 3 years before getting their subsidies that we promised to them. The project of common interest, the so-called IPCEI, are a very good thing. And I really think that this is a breakthrough in the European policy. But 2 or 3 years is too long. We have to act swiftly, and we want to reduce the delay from 2 or 3 years to 6 months before giving the subsidies that are required by the industry. The second key pillar must be simplification. The European process remains too tricky and too complicated for the economic actors. We need to go the way of simplification. That has been underlined by President Ursula von der Leyen, and Ursula is right. We need to simplify the European process. And the third point is to focus on very specific sectors. The question is, where do we want to spend our European money? Do we want to buy foreign goods, foreign devices, foreign electric car batteries, or do we want to put the money in investment? With President Macron, we are fully convinced that there is a need to invest more in hydrogen, in semiconductors, in solar panels, in nuclear energy, in renewable energies, with the view of being more independent and with the view of better fighting against climate change while mixing growth and the fight against climate change. The key for that is the decarbonization of the economy. Decarbonization of the economy is the biggest challenge that we have to face, which will help us to reconciliate growth and climate.
I think everybody in the room was along for the ride until you started talking about foreign products. And then I think people went, oh, okay, this is a made in Europe, Europe first agenda. So I'm thinking now, do I need to stock up on my French cheeses and buy my American motorcycles? Because when you start talking that kind of language, it sounds a lot like America first. If you're talking Europe first...
I will respond to you very bluntly.
I mean, is this protection? Are we talking about protectionism?
No protectionism. I'm not talking about protectionism. I'm talking about preserving and defending the economic interests. But let's be very clear. The key question is not China first, or United States first, or Europe first. The key question for all of us and for all the nations in the world is climate first. And if we want to have climate first, we need to invest more in the fight against climate change. We need to invest more in the green industry. We need to have our own chips being produced in Europe. And our strategic goal is very clear. We want to come from 9% of the semiconductors produced in Europe to 20%. And this is absolutely compatible with the determination of the US to have more semiconductors and more chips being produced in the US. And that's perfectly compatible with the ambition of China to get also access to semiconductors. There is a place for all of us in the fight against climate change and in the decarbonization of the economies.